Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive with us. Today, we're going to a place you might not have heard of, but a place with a fascinating story, the Guji Zone in Ethiopia. Now, what's so special about this place?
Well, the Guji Zone is sitting on what our sources call acres of gold.
Acres of gold. Okay, so we're talking serious wealth potential here.
Right. But here's the catch. Instead of seeing widespread prosperity, the Guji people are facing poverty, health issues, and a whole host of problems that come along with resource extraction.
So that's what we're trying to unpack today. How can a region so rich in resources be home to so much suffering? We'll be digging into a document titled Acres of Gold to try and shed light on this really complex situation.
Yeah, it's a real paradox, and it speaks to a lot of the issues we see playing out around the world when it comes to resource extraction. And I think the document does a really good job of using a personal story as a way to highlight these broader issues.
Okay, so who are we meeting?
The story centers around a couple, Gold2 and Boru.
And what's their story?
So we're introduced to Gold2, and she's frantically searching for her husband, Boru. He's just vanished without a trace, and she's desperate to find him.
Oh, wow.
And it's even more heartbreaking when you consider what they've already been through. This couple has experienced 4 miscarriages and a stillbirth.
Oh, my gosh. That's devastating. And now her husband disappears, too.
Right. So there's this immediate sense of worry and loss. But as the story unfolds, you start to see how their personal tragedy might be connected to a much larger issue at play.
I see. So it's not just an isolated incident. Their story is a symptom of something bigger.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Boru, we find out, was laid off from his job at the Lega Dembi gold mine.
Okay, so this is where the gold comes in.
Yep. And this mine is a major player in the region, and it's been the source of both employment and conflict.
Right.
Later on, Boru stumbles across a newspaper article about the mine's owner, a man named Mohammed Alamudi.
Alamudi.
Yeah. And the article highlights how his net worth has skyrocketed by millions in just a few days.
Whoa. So you have Boru struggling to make ends meet after losing his job at the mine, and then you have the mine owner experiencing this incredible wealth boom.
It's a stark contrast. It really makes you question how the benefits of these resources are being distributed, who's profiting and who's bearing the cost.
Yeah, it seems like there's a huge imbalance there.
Yeah.
But okay, so we have Gold2 searching for her husband Boru, who's lost his job at the mine, and then we have this incredibly wealthy mine owner. What else is going on in Guji?
Well, there's another character I think we should talk about who provides a really interesting perspective on the situation. Grandma.
Okay, so she's like an elder in the community.
Yeah, a wise woman who's seen a lot of changes in Guji. She opens the story with a prayer surrendering to her black god.
A black god. That's an interesting phrase. What do you think that symbolizes?
That's a great question. It's never explicitly stated, but it seems to represent the complex relationship that the Guji people have with gold.
Okay, so not a literal god, but more of a concept.
Exactly. It's this powerful force that's both revered and feared. It holds the promise of wealth and prosperity, but also brings with it a lot of pain and suffering.
I see, so like a double-edged sword.
Yeah, and Grandma captures this so beautifully in her words. She talks about sitting on acres of gold while being the walking dead.
Wow, that's heavy. She's surrounded by this wealth, this resource that's supposed to bring a better life, but she feels like she's already gone.
Right. And she goes on to describe how life in Guji has changed drastically since the arrival of large-scale mining. She talks about the loss of unity, the frequent earthquakes.
Quakes.
Yeah, it's like the earth itself is rebelling against what's happening. And then she mentions poisoned wombs.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's chilling.
Ah.
Clearly, she sees a direct link between the mining operation and the suffering of her people, particularly the women.
Absolutely. And it brings up a lot of questions about the promises that were made to the Guji people versus the reality they're facing.
Yeah, because I remember reading about all the promises of development and prosperity that were supposed to come with the gold mine.
Right. Initially, the government painted a very rosy picture. They promised roads, schools, electricity jobs, all the things that would signify a brighter future.
And yet, what we're seeing is far from that. We have Gold2 and Boru struggling with the most basic necessities. Their water is polluted, their food is contaminated, they're surrounded by toxic chemicals.
The document uses really powerful language to describe this gold-enriched water, food flavored with heavy butter.
It's a stark image of how their environment, their very sustenance, has been compromised. But what about the health implications? We keep hearing about these chemicals, but how do they actually affect the people of Guji?
Well, I think that's something we need to dig into further.
Let's do that after a quick break.
So we're talking about chemicals like cyanide and mercury, both of which are extremely toxic.
Yeah, okay, so not good stuff.
Yeah.
But how do they actually impact people's health?
Well, exposure to cyanide can be really dangerous because it interferes with the body's ability to use oxygen.
So basically, it suffocates you from the inside out.
Yeah, you can experience rapid breathing seizures and even coma. In severe cases, it can be fatal.
That's terrifying. And what about mercury?
Mercury is kind of insidious because it tends to accumulate in the body over time. It can damage the nervous system, kidneys, and it's especially harmful to developing fetuses.
So that ties back to Grandma's mention of poisoned wombs.
Exactly. Studies have shown a clear link between mercury exposure and increased risk of miscarriage, stillbirth, and birth defects.
And this is happening in Guji.
It's a very real concern. And it's not just about the immediate impact on infants. We're talking about long-term developmental problems, learning difficulties, and other issues that can affect a child's entire life.
It's just heartbreaking to think about these families already dealing with poverty and environmental degradation. And then they're hit with this added burden of caring for children who require extra support and medical attention.
And this is where I think the real tragedy lies. The impact of these mining operations extends far beyond the immediate environment. We're talking about generations being affected, the health of a community being compromised for years to come.
It really makes you question the whole notion of progress and development. When you see the true cost, the human cost, it's hard to justify the supposed benefits.
It's like this dark side of progress that often gets ignored or downplayed. The document refers to it as the curse of gold.
And that's not just a metaphor. It's a very real and devastating reality for the Guji people.
Absolutely. It challenges us to think about the hidden consequences of our actions, of our consumption habits, and the way we interact with the environment.
It's easy to get caught up in the allure of gold, the beauty, the wealth it represents.
Yeah.
But we have to remember that there's a whole other story, a much darker story behind that shimmering surface.
And it's a story that's playing out not just in Guji, but in countless communities around the world, wherever there's valuable resources to be extracted.
And these communities often don't have the power or the resources to fight back.
That's right. They're often marginalized, silenced, and exploited.
But in Guji, it seems like the people aren't just passively accepting their fate. The document talks about protests, about attempts to push back against the mine, and demand accountability.
Yeah, there's definitely a sense of resistance, a refusal to be silenced.
So what happened? How did the government respond to these protests?
Well, the government's response was brutal, to say the least.
Brutal how?
We're talking arrests, killings, torture. They used every tool at their disposal to crush the dissent.
Wow. So basically they were punished for speaking out, for trying to protect their land and their health.
It's a classic example of how power dynamics play out in these situations. When communities try to assert their rights, they often face violent repression from those in power.
It's almost like a David and Goliath situation, except in this case, Goliath is winning.
Yeah, it can feel that way, especially when you look at the government's actions. They actually revoked the mining license at one point.
Really? So they acknowledged the problems.
But then they reissued it later, leaving the community with this deep sense of betrayal and hopelessness.
So it's like a false promise,
Yeah.
a glimmer of hope that was quickly extinguished.
Exactly. And it left people feeling defeated and powerless.
So where do they go from here? What happens next?
Well, that's where things get interesting because the document hints at something else emerging from this shared struggle.
What's that?
They call it collective wisdom.
Okay, so what does that mean?
It's hard to define, but I think it speaks to the resilience of the human spirit, the ability to find strength and unity even in the face of immense adversity.
So even though they've been through so much, even though they've faced such brutal repression, there's still a glimmer of hope.
I think so. The Guji people have experienced firsthand the devastating consequences of gold mining, and that shared experience is forging a powerful sense of solidarity. They're realizing that their fate is intertwined with the fate of their land and their community.
And that realization could be the key to creating real change.
It's about recognizing that they're not alone in this fight, that there are others who share their concerns and are willing to stand with them.
And that's where I think it becomes relevant for you, the listener, because while we're talking specifically about Guji today, this story raises questions about our own role in this system.
Absolutely.
We all consume gold in one way or another, whether it's jewelry, electronics, or even dental fillings. What does it say about our global consumption habits that a community on the other side of the world is suffering so profoundly to provide us with this resource?
It forces us to confront the true cost of gold, the hidden consequences of our choices as consumers. We often think of gold as a symbol of wealth and luxury, but behind that shimmering surface lies a complex and often exploitative industry.
So how do we reconcile that? How do we balance our desire for gold with the ethical concerns surrounding its extraction?
That's the question, isn't it? How do we reconcile our desire for these things with the impact they have?
Yeah, it's like we want the shiny object, but we don't want to think about where it comes from or who might be getting hurt in the process.
And I don't think there's an easy answer. But awareness is key. We need to understand where our gold comes from, the journey it takes from the mine to our hands.
Okay, but does simply being aware actually make a difference?
I think it does. Because when we start asking questions, when we start demanding transparency from companies, when we start making conscious choices about the products we buy, that sends a powerful message.
So it's about using our consumer power to influence change.
Exactly. We become part of the solution, not the problem.
So what would that look like in practice? Are we talking about boycotting gold altogether?
Not necessarily. I mean, there are organizations that are working to promote ethical and sustainable practices in the mining industry.
Okay, so there are alternatives.
Yeah, you can choose recycled gold, or you can seek out jewelers who prioritize transparency and fair trade. And by supporting these initiatives, we can help shift the industry towards a more responsible model.
So it's about being informed consumers, making choices that align with our values.
Exactly. And it's about using our voices to advocate for change within the industry itself.
Because ultimately what we do as individuals does have an impact.
Absolutely. Remember the story of gold2 and Boru. Their struggle is a powerful reminder that behind every piece of gold, there are real people and real communities whose lives are affected by our choices.
Yeah, their story really brings it home. It makes it personal.
And it challenges us to think about our role in this global system of consumption and extraction.
It's a sobering thought. As we wrap up this deep dive, what stands out to you, listener? What image or story or feeling stays with you?
For me, it's the image of grandma sitting on acres of gold while feeling like the walking dead. That juxtaposition of wealth and despair is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, it speaks volumes about the broken promises, the unfulfilled expectations, the sense of betrayal that the Goody people are experiencing.
And it's a reminder that true wealth isn't just about material possessions. It's about well-being. It's about community. It's about having a healthy environment.
And it's about recognizing the interconnectedness of our world, how our actions have ripple effects that extend far beyond ourselves. So as we go forward, let's remember the story of Gucci. Let's remember gold2 and Boru and Grandma. Let's remember that our choices matter. And let's use our voices and our actions to create a world where wealth and well-being are shared by all.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us on this journey to Gucci. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking those nuggets of knowledge that can help us build a brighter, more just world for everyone.